because often people are literally, metaphorically, in a prison, okay, in your work. Would you sort of say that one of your themes is how to free yourself, how to liberate yourself? And if so, is it something you can do by your own power, strength, or do you need institutions, structures, social changes?
Well, I think I am preoccupied with all sorts of prisons, but increasingly I think in my fiction characters remain trapped. Actually, they don't manage to escape. I mean, I think of all my novels, Tipping the Velvet was the most optimistic in terms of people being able to reinvent themselves, to carve out a path for themselves. But actually, I'm more drawn, really, especially as I get older, to rather bleaker stories of people who can't triumph over limited opportunities. Which doesn't mean that I'm at all a pessimistic person, quite the contrary. Like, say with Poltergeist, sorry. I did a lot of research into Poltergeist for The Little Stranger, and what's fascinating about Poltergeist stories is that they're very similar across history, but that they're often very domestic stories again, and they often take place within families, and usually it's pretty clear that there's some conflict in this family, there's some unhappiness in this family that's being enacted in whatever kind of way, supernatural way or just in an unconscious kind of trickery or whatever, as this eruption of violence. I find that really interesting.
When I read your work, I get the impression that you write with great ease. Do you?
Yes and no, I suppose. Writing is always a struggle for me. I don't know about you, but it's always hard to sit down at my desk and start writing every day. But then I have to make myself do it, I suppose, is what I'm saying. If I waited until I felt in the mood to write, I would never write anything at all. It's like going to the gym. You never want to go to the gym, but
once you're there, it's nice.
And afterwards, it's brilliant. Writing is exactly like that for me. So it's never a joy. I never sit down with glee.
Just because a narrator is a woman doesn't mean she's like me anyway. You have to do this, you have to make this leap into somebody else's mind.
Perhaps the leap was bigger this time? Or?
Yeah, I think so. But again, in all sorts of ways, because he's a rather dull character. I mean, I can identify with that, being rather dull myself. But what I mean is, he's not just a man, he's a particular man with a particular set of issues. So,
what kind of man is he?
Well, he's rather priggish, he's rather sort of stuffy in lots of ways. He's very attached to his professional status because he's worked hard to get there, it's kind of all he has. So I don't know if you noticed, but he has no first name.
No, I've noticed that.
He's just Dr. Farrader.
He is Doctor.
Which I didn't even plan at the start, but just I realised after a while that nobody was calling him by his first name. And that actually made lots of sense to me. It made perfect sense to me. There was only one point way in the book when it would have been natural for somebody to say his name, and I didn't allow her to do that. So I'll be responsible for the costume, but on set that's a whole team of people just doing the costume. There's a separate department doing the weather, Which is really, the first time when Tipping the Velvet was made, the first time I went on set and I saw all these people, it felt really weird, and I was actually completely redundant at that point. I was getting in the way and stuff like that. It was really quite weird.
But did you recognize it? Was it still the work of your imagination?
Yes, it was. It was. And sometimes, there are moments in each of the adaptations that are exactly as I've imagined them. Yeah, and then others that aren't, but that's okay. But then there are other things, like I remember with Fingersmith, when Fingersmith was filmed, the actor who plays Gentleman, Rupert Evans, it was between filming, and he was in his costume, and he was wandering around having a cigarette on his own, and I was just watching him, and actually in that moment he was much more like the character in the book than when he was actually acting, and that was quite a spooky moment, just seeing him wandering. Yeah.
characters in my novels before, but I haven't had a male narrator. So there were some things I was conscious about, trying to get right. But actually, with any narrator, you have to make this imaginative leap. Just because a narrator may be female, it doesn't necessarily mean she resembles me. You still have to do that work. I did notice his gender. He develops a rather awkward relationship with Caroline, the daughter of the Hall, and of course I'm very used to writing about desire, but it's usually been desire between women, and rather furtive and secret, and perhaps exciting for that reason. But I was very conscious when I was, I was sort of inhabiting Dr. Faraday, and he's got this kind of weight of entitlement behind his desire for Caroline that was both very liberating and also slightly sinister for me, slightly troubling, which I quite liked in a way. But it was, I hadn't anticipated that, and that was interesting.
And that's why I thought he was a real villain of the piece, because it was so sinister, him claiming her. And I thought, is she lesbian, Caroline?
Well, I thought people might think that. Not that I really intended her to be, although I'm very happy for people to interpret her as lesbian. She's got kind of thick ankles and
Well, that's not a reason, but she's not really turned on by that cluster.
No, but then why? There's lots of reasons why a heterosexual woman wouldn't be turned on by a particular man. For me, she was more of an awkward heterosexual rather than a... But she's very independent, and she's clearly ill at ease with femininity. So, of course, that will, mean that lesbians might identify with her, or even identify her as a lesbian.